Welcome to The Third Story. I'm Leo Sidran. Today's conversation features George Wein, creator of the Newport Jazz Festival and an innovator of musical presentation. George is turning 90 years old this year, but he's still very active, both as a promoter and producer of musical events, and also as a kind of an advocate for younger musicians and for American music in general. The Newport Jazz Festival, which first launched in 1954, has become a kind of a archetype, the standard of what a jazz festival can be. There was a film that was made in 1958 called Jazz on a Summer's Day, which featured a day in the life of the festival, and it really captured the spirit and the energy of jazz at that time. Over the years, of course, the music has changed and evolved, and speaking to George today about that evolution is very interesting. This is a guy that really has seen almost a century of the music and has been a part of it. I recently went up to his apartment on the Upper East Side in Manhattan, sat at his dining room table, and we spoke for an hour, and you can feel the importance of the music and the business in keeping him alive and keeping him vibrant. I asked him whether or not he felt like a father figure or a grandfather figure to young musicians today, and although he did recognize that he has had a certain influence on many people's careers, he also acknowledged that he relies on young talent to keep him vibrant and engaged, and you feel that the music, as they say, it's going to do one of two things. It'll either kill you or it'll keep you young. Well, in George Wein's case, it's keeping him young. I'm very excited to present this episode to you today because it is on the eve of the 2015 Newport Jazz Festival, and I'm pleased to say that I'll be there this year reporting the news on the ground in collaboration with WBGO Radio and my father, Ben Sidran. Many of the shorter segments that we gather and produce will be available on WBGO, and then later, the longer form pieces that we collect there will be available on The Third Story. So it's a wonderful collaboration, and it's a wonderful way to go to the Newport Jazz Festival and bring you some serious inside stuff. You can go to third-story.com. That's the way you can sign up to the newsletter. You can subscribe on the iTunes store, and you can leave a review if you want. It's the best way to hear previous episodes, get a lay of the land, and leave your mark. Without further delay, here is my conversation with George Wein.
How old are you now?
38.
38. Well, you're getting up there. Well, you're not a kid anymore.
Well, youth is over, that somebody told me.
Yeah.
You're turning 90 this year. The festival had its 60th anniversary last year. What does it feel like to look at? Those are some big round numbers.
You know, it's interesting. People ask that. In my body, I feel 90 years old, but in my head, I don't feel that way. I mean, I'm still totally active in what we're doing. And I've just checked the books. We're a few hundred tickets behind last year. So I got to sit with my people and say, how can we make up? Is it the cost? Was it the weather that it rained last year? You know, and we're sold and we're doing okay. We had a nice week last week, but at the same time, I'm a little concerned, you know, so we got to figure out what we're going to do. But at this point, the difference is that I don't care that much about the business. I mean, if a few hundred people offer something, that doesn't bother me. What I'm concerned with is a great festival, because the motivation for making money is no longer there. I have enough, I'm comfortable enough the way I am, and we created this nonprofit foundation. Our big thing is raising money, not creating successful festivals and raising money for an endowment. So you have a different approach to things, and you want to present a lot of young artists. Well, before, I could not do that. I could not do to the extent. I could do some of it. But now with 45 segments, and maybe even a couple more segments between the 3 stages in 3 days and 5 groups a stage, it gives us a little leeway to bring in as many as 15 different relatively unknown groups that might be known in the jazz world, but aren't known to the general public. And that's exciting because we go out and hear that music and listen to that music all year long. I go to clubs, and I go out to Brooklyn, I go to the clubs in New York, the little clubs, the joints, and just to hear groups, to hear musicians. And so I've got some young people with me that work for me. They always bring me records to hear. And so it keeps me vital, it keeps me alive. So the fact that I'm 90, going to be 90, is really not important in that respect. It's important that I don't walk as well, and I need my rest. But beyond that, I don't relate I don't relate to you that I'm 90 and you're 38. I don't relate that way. I mean, I ask your age just to find out. You learn when you know a person's age, you know a little bit about his history. Automatically, you know where you come from. So people ask that. My appetite's still good, so I eat and enjoy I don't eat as much, but I mean, other than that, I don't have any feelings of age. You know.
Your father lived to 97, and he attributed his longevity to the track.
Yeah, he lived to be 95. He's going to be 96, I think, when he died, a few days from it. And he used to take time off, but then he stopped in his 80s because it was too exciting for him. If his horse lost, he got too... And most of the time his horse was lost, so...
So maybe that's the difference between you. You don't get so... It's not a problem to be excited for you.
Well, I've been involved in risking all my life, you know, so the risk in such a thing is not what it used to be. I mean, we used to be counting every penny because we needed every penny. And if we didn't hit a certain figure, we didn't know what we were going to do the next year. You know, that was risk. But now I don't, thank heavens, I don't worry about that. Did a few things in my life that you know, I started collecting art at an early age, African American art. And I did not collect it as an investment, I just collected it because I enjoyed it. It became an incredible investment without my realizing it. And it's helped my old age tremendously. And a couple of other things, real estate things. I never made any money in the music business to speak of. I made a living, and it was okay, but not enough to... It's very difficult to make money in the music business.
It's interesting that you say that. It's difficult to make money in the music business because you seem like you were relentless in your pursuit of continuing, not to make money, but to do projects, to move forward, to bounce back. And it clearly was not money that motivated you. I know that you started out as a musician, and I couldn't help but think that maybe the thing that kind of motivated you was just that same impulse that led you to sit down and play the piano when you were a boy.
I always, my mind always worked about organizing and doing something. And even when I was a kid, I had a band when I was 13, 14, and I called the other kids in the neighborhood, or even in other neighborhoods. They came from Brookline, and I lived in Newton. And next thing I know, we were rehearsing every Sunday in my cellar of my house, and I was buying stock arrangements for 75 cents, and we were learning how to play the Johnson Rag and Tuxedo Junction and things like that. And so that was always I never had any motivation in a certain direction. It was just like, hey, I got things to do here, you know. And then somebody said to me, I was playing at clubs in Boston, why don't you open up your own club? Next thing I knew, I had Storyville, and then people came to me about doing something at Newport. The Laureliards came, and I said, why not do a festival? You know, we have Tanglewood, classical festival, why can't we have a jazz festival? So everything just, my mind never stopped. My mind is still working. We have some great announcements to make in the next few weeks of ideas I've had that I'm just bringing forth this past month. So we'll see what happens. That's all, you know. You just have to follow your own road. You know, I've always done that. I never followed anybody else's road. I followed my own road. But I never had a motivation to go from here to there. I never had that. I had a motivation to do something to get me going. And even when I had riots and was wiped out, you know, my wife used to say, the minute it was over and the minute the thing, you were always thinking of what you're going to do next. I never went through depressions or anything, even when I was wiped out. I have a statement in my book, I've never been poor, but I've been broke. I'm proud of what I've done. At the same time, my lawyer, Elliot Hoffman, would say, but George, you do not know how important you are.
Mm-hmm.
Because I couldn't stop to think about how important I was. I was too busy thinking of what to do. And to this day, I know how important we are, but I don't think of it that way. And I've been so honored this year, I couldn't imagine not being aware of it. Between the BU just gave me a honorary doctorate of humane letters, which is a big thing. The Grammys did a big thing for me. It's a building named after me and my wife Joyce in New Orleans. And I mean, this year's been nothing but a string. The ASCAP put my name on the Jazz Wall of Fame, and then and one after another, all these things. If a week goes by and I'm not on it, I think something's wrong. It's a kind of a thing you wish your mother and father were around to see.
Even at 90, you think to yourself.
At 90, even that, you think, I wish my mother and father to see me get that doctorate at Boston University. I've received about 3 or 4 of those, but I mean, the one at BU was the one because that was the school I went to. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't a great student,
If you like what you're hearing and you're curious about some of the other episodes on The Third Story, I encourage you now to go to third-story.com to subscribe and check out some of the previous interviews and episodes that we've had. It's a good way to stay in touch and make sure that you are always up to date. Here we are with George Wein talking about the importance of jazz. Over the years, George has had his own affiliation with folk music, pop music to an extent, and has promoted a lot of different types of music. Here he talks about the personal importance to him of jazz music.
You got to stick with jazz.
Well, it's interesting because you have interacted with a lot of forms of popular music and particularly the experience of folk music. I'm curious to know what you took away from that experience, maybe not even musically, but just in terms of the culture around folk music or the attitudes around folk music.
Well, again, it's part of your influence in growing up. The jazz clubs, like I went to in New York, but you'd find that Josh White was there or the Weavers or different things like that. So when I had my club in Boston, when I couldn't get a jazz attraction, I'd put in a folk attraction. The two seemed to relate. And so when I was doing so many different programs at Newport, we did a tap dance afternoon, we did a gospel afternoon, and I said, let's do a folk afternoon. And I put together this program with Odetta and Pete and the Kingston Trio, and it was so big, the response, I said, hey, there's enough here for a festival. So, I mean, it came out of my background. I didn't just go ahead and say, let's do a folk festival. I mean, one thing followed another. When the gospel afternoon was a success and the jazz, let's do a folk afternoon. But that was bigger than everything. The next thing we know, we caught the folk revival with Bob Dylan and Joan Baez and Peter, Paul, and Mary. And we had this huge festival. And then Dylan went electric, and that was the beginning of the end of that festival. But now we've caught another wave, My Morning Jacket, Jim James, and all of those different groups, the Avett Brothers, so many different, and that's a wave that has come in, and that's why we're selling out every night. There's no wave in jazz right now. There was a wave in the 50s with Ella Fitzgerald and Sarah Vaughan and Errol Garner sold and Dave Brubeck, They were popular figures, and we don't have any of those figures right now. But that wave is what built the Newport Jazz Festival, because I sensed that when I had my club, I could see who was doing business and who wasn't doing business. And so when I put the festivals together, I sort of knew what to do automatically.
You seem very in touch with the details of so much of the business of the last 60 years, 70 years. You can remember who played and more or less what the money scene was like, and so much of the interactions that you had. How did you keep track of all of it? How do you continue to keep track of all of it?
Well, I was not a very good mathematics student, but I was very good in arithmetic. So I think I could add up what my budget was and what we had to take in to meet the budget. But I was never a good businessman because I never knew how to have cash flow and all those different things that you learn about in business school, because I never went to business school. I went to liberal arts. So maybe if I'd have known a little bit more about business, I might have been in better shape than I ended up. But arithmetic I knew, and I was very good at arithmetic. In fact, when computers came out, I was still adding up columns faster than the computer could do. But I was never a good math student. I was not good at mathematics. But all those things, when you organize something, when you you say, well, let's have a band and we go on the road, you got to know what you're going to pay everybody. So you also got to know what they're going to pay you, so you could pay everybody and pay the transportation and pay the hotels. So your mind automatically would work at that. You see, in 1969, I had all the rock groups at Newport, and that was a very low point for jazz. It was 4 or 5 years after the Beatles came in, and the whole music scene had changed. And so I felt that we had to get up to date. And I brought in a lot of rock groups. And next thing I know, I had a rock festival, not a jazz festival. And I said, I don't want this. This is not my life, because it was wide open for the rock promoters. But I didn't want it. I wanted to create my own festivals. And I didn't want to just service groups. And you made much more money just servicing groups that were selling huge tickets. You put the name in the paper or whatever. Now you don't even need the name in the paper. You just put it on the website, and the next thing you know, you're selling 20, 30, 40,000 tickets. That's a different world.
Something that occurred to me when I was thinking about that exact same question and why you chose not to pursue maybe slightly more commercial avenue is that your name was so often attached to the work that you did. It wasn't just a kind of an invisible festival, but your name was often on the marquee as well, and so it was your reputation, and maybe also said something about who you were by presenting it personally.
Well, I think that has to do with a lot of things. I always noticed that in classical music or whatever it was, Sol Hurog presents, And so it's just natural. When I opened up my club, I called it George Wein's Storyville. I think that was just from the influence of what was happening. And of course, I like to see my name in the paper. His ego was involved, and you wanted people to know what you were doing. Now I don't do that. You don't see George Wein's name involved with the Newport Foundation that much. But at a period in your life, I think that's important to build your reputation. And it's not only building your reputation in the industry, it's building your reputation with the public. That if you build a brand, and your brand signifies a certain credibility with the music presenting, it's going to help you. But I think it's tradition that had me do that, seeing in the newspaper every day, so-and-so presents so-and-so. Norman Granz presents Jazz at the Philharmonic. And so the tradition is what more or less directed me that way. But at the same time, a little ego bit involved there. And we all have an ego. I find that the ego is fine as long as you don't let it take over. As long as you understand what it is.
I've heard you talk about coming back from the war and feeling that in this space of a couple of years, the music had kind of changed out from under you. The difference between swing and bebop seemed so vast to you at the time.
At that time, it sounded like a different world. I mean, when you heard Johnny Hodges play and then you heard Charlie Parker play, it was two different worlds. And it took me a few years to adjust to the fact that, hey, these musics were very related. And, I actually had a set where Charlie Parker played with my band with Doc Cheatham and Vic Dickinson. I was playing piano, and we played Royal Garden Blues. And Bird started to play, man, and forget it. I mean, he just tore us apart, But then when I opened the club and I had a lot of contemporary groups playing, then I could hear and listen and understand, get it in my blood so that you get... But for a few years, I resisted it, I say, hey, I'm Duke Ellington, Louis Armstrong. Who the hell is Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie? I knew Dizzy when he's a trumpet player with Cab Calloway. What is this bebop,
But it's so interesting when you think since then, and even in a short amount of time between the late 40s and the late 60s, you talk about having rock acts on the bill in the end of the 60s. The music progressed and evolved so quickly from that point.
Well, it's still evolving, and what's happening now is people are rejecting one style of how to play. You'll find out a lot of young people are getting involved with the history of music, and they can play everything from Jelly Roll Morton to John Coltrane. And you have a piano player like, say, Jason Moran, or Aaron Deal, or you have a clarinet player like Annette Cohen, or people like Scott Robinson. These are musicians that are contemporary, that understand the totality of the music and are developing their own voice. I can't even say their own style, but their own voice. And I think that's the direction jazz is going, because these kids come out of an academic jazz background. They go to school to learn about jazz. The jazz, right up through the bebop era, it wasn't, they knew how to play and they studied music, but they didn't study jazz per se. They had lessons on their instrument, they learned about harmony, but they developed, it was all from swing right through bebop. There was a lot of folk music involved. Not folk music, but the folk element was in their playing. It came out of the streets. It came out of the countryside, whatever it was. Now it comes out of the schools, and so out of all these thousands of kids that graduate every year, there's got to be a few geniuses. So we have to find the geniuses that can communicate to the public and still be playing their music.
Do you think that there are more or less the same number of geniuses per player today as there were in the heyday, or what we would say the first 50 to 80 years of the music? Or do you think it's harder to find the stylists today? I mean, how do you think in terms of just finding the greats? Because there's so many players today that are coming out of these schools.
It's very difficult. And I keep thinking I'm up to date on what's happening, and then I realize there's a whole bunch of musicians I know nothing about. So it's very difficult to find out who are the leaders. And it used to be that musicians determined who was the leader. So when Charlie Parker came along, he automatically became the leader, and everybody was. When Coltrane developed his thing, he was the leader. Nobody had to ask who the leader is. The musicians told you who the leader was. And Ornette Coleman came along, and he was a leader. I don't see anyone there today. You've got John Zorn as the leader of his cult of followers, which is a beautiful cult and it's a beautiful thing, but he's not the leader of the whole jazz world. And Bird was the leader of the whole jazz world. Coltrane is the voice of the 21st century, actually. They're still playing Coltrane. And he's replaced Bird as the voice. So where is it going? I don't know, but the musicians are still playing. As long as they're playing, as long as they're searching, it's fun to listen.
George Wein talking about 20th century music enduring into the 21st century. Speaking of the 21st century, I know I've been encouraging you to sign up on the website, third-story.com. However, if you are a truly 21st century kind of person, here's a truly 21st century solution for you. You can follow me on Twitter at Leo Sidran, where you can catch up-to-the-moment updates on what's happening on the ground and in my head. And now back to the conversation with George Wein, in which he explains the significance of jazz festivals and how they impact the greater musical community throughout the year. By connecting with me on Twitter, of course, you can contact me directly as well. Let me know, what do you think? What's your experience with music festivals? Have you been to the Newport Jazz Festival? What do you think about George's take on the importance of music festivals and the influence that they've had over the years? As somebody who started in the club business and then developed the festival business, you've seen it both ways. You've seen what it's like to have to bring in 100 people into a room on a Tuesday night because it's Tuesday night and you've got to open again tomorrow. And you've also seen what it's like to try to collect thousands of people into a shared experience. How are they related? For example, one of the things I've been thinking about is the festivals are so wonderful because they bring in a collection of people together. You can see a lot of music. But I wonder if it turns people into lifetime jazz fans if they have an experience in a festival, or if they get together for a weekend and they hear music and then they go home and they go to the festival again next year. I wonder if it's the same kind of fan.
I always said festivals were basically public relations for jazz. That was what I always said, how many people live in Newport that are jazz fans? But so people come from all over to Newport, but what it does, they go back home and there's not much jazz in their towns. So maybe festivals are what they, but then when they come to New York, they go to a jazz club. When you talk about clubs and 100 people on a Tuesday night, I would have Duke Ellington or Louis Armstrong or any of the greatest people in the world and have 40, 50 people. I go in clubs now where people don't even know who's playing there, and they're full. Because people come to New York, tourists come to New York, and they go to a jazz club the way when you go to Spain, you go to hear flamenco. It's good. It's good. Clubs, that's why you have a lot of jazz. Do you know there's about 1,000 nights of jazz a month in the New York area? Did you just check Hot House or the jazz community papers, and you'll see every night 20, 30 places to go hear jazz. A lot of places the musicians are working for the door, they're working for nothing. They're young people that want to be heard, they want to practice, they want to develop them, and they're playing somewhere.
I wonder if you've noticed any change in the kinds of people who are playing the music today. It really was primarily an African-American music when it started.
It's a good question because I always answer it. I think there's a lot of middle-class kids that don't want to work for a living go into music. Their parents are relatively successful in a small way or a big way. It doesn't make any difference. And they don't want to go, they don't want to be doctors, they don't want to be lawyers. Some of them want to be cooks. Have you noticed how many young people take up cooking or cuisine and want to be chefs? So when I grew up, nobody wanted to be a chef. They want to be a doctor or a lawyer or go into business. And nowadays, they want to play music. And they think it's not, they don't have to work for a living. Believe me, you have to work. So, no, it's different. It's more of a middle-class music than it was. And because there's still music from the African Americans, but hey, they make more money playing funk music and soul music. You get a job in one of those big bands that go out with, say, Beyonce or just any one of the, you're making a good year's pay. You build your own group and you go out and you can play and you're making much more money than the jazz players.
You know, I have not heard anybody say that, but you're absolutely right. So many of those bands, Beyonce's band, even Justin Timberlake, who's a white entertainer, he has a very black band. So maybe some of the great black players today are choosing to be in what the equivalent of a big band would be today, a pop band that allows them to play and avoid the broke life of a jazz musician.
Well, you go where the money is. Hey, they need the money. These kids don't have any money. They don't play basketball, they don't play football, they play music. So where's the money in the music, you know?
I think a lot has been made about the relationship between blacks and Jews in the 20th century in shaping popular music and popular culture. You, I think, wore that very close to home. You became part of a black family as well and grew up in a Jewish family. What drew you to black culture?
Well, when I became interested in music, my heroes were all Duke Ellington, and I was more attracted to Duke and Louis, but I love Benny Goodman as well. But see, Teddy Wilson and Lionel Hampton were with Benny, and that was very interesting to me. And so I think that what drew me to black culture was jazz, no question about it. I mean, there's no question about it that it was. But even my father, he liked the great blackface, but he was black and so, but he wore one of the great vaudeville performers, and he liked them. So in my house, there was always a concern for black music to a degree, and not jazz necessarily, but and then with sports. Jesse Owens, Joe Louis. We rooted for Joe Louis, you know, to win. I was a big rooter for Joe Louis. So black culture, again, and then I got involved in New York when I came down. I got involved in a lot of the left-wing communists, you know, and I write about it in my book. And they taught me a lot. But not communism. I was never interested in being a communist. But the reason they were involved was They weren't Stalinists. They were people that believed that it was an ideal world, which of course it wasn't an ideal world. But the idealism rubbed off on me a little bit. And so all of these things affected my life. But then Pete Seeger was a big influence in my life, and a good friend, So these people that were idealists, I had that little mixture. I knew I could exercise my ideals, if I could be a success in what I was doing, which is what I'm doing now, So
With the foundation?
In foundation, with my personal life, So, and I've sort of done that all my life, in my way. It's like the young kids that did Woodstock. They knew what was happening. They put on a thing. That's what an entrepreneur does. That's what a producer does. They catch the wave of what's going, and then they say, I want to do this. Next thing you know, they've created something big. The kids that do Bonnaroo, they worked in New Orleans. They worked for Quint Davis. Next thing, they went and built their own festival in the woods. And they made millions of dollars, And so good luck to them, And
do you feel a sense of responsibility, or almost like the kind of the godfather figure, looking at all of these other festivals that have kind of grown out of the spirit of Newport and New Orleans?
Well, when I received, there were two occasions when you go to the Grammys. And one of them, they give you the award, and the other one, they just mention you at the Grammys. And I was going to make a speech, but I didn't. And the next night, LL Cool J, when he introduced me, said exactly what I was thinking of saying. I didn't want to claim it myself, that from Newport, everything that's happened since developed from the Newport and the Newport Folk Festival and New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Festival. They mentioned Bonnaroo and Coachella. You look back to the roots, and they came from the Newport Festival. So that's why I was getting the award. They finally came around to think like that. I knew it, because I knew that Woodstock, half the people that were running the festival came from my festival. The sound and the lighting people, they worked for me at Newport. And so I knew that the people have been paying attention to what we were doing. And I knew that New Orleans, with the multi-stage things that we developed there, that's what developed in the Bonnaroo and in Coachella. So I'm proud of that, but I I didn't think of that while I was doing them. It wasn't, we were just busy. Could we finish this year and do next year? That's what we had in mind. We weren't following a pattern or a book.
Mm-hmm. One of the interesting things you talk about with Woodstock is that they understood how to sort of tap into the cultural zeitgeist, but they couldn't figure out how to make any money at it because they were so overwhelmed with people. And this kind of coincided with this tendency among young people to want to receive music for free and not pay for it. I think in some ways we're in a second wave of that mentality right now. It's maybe not showing up in the live venues, but it's very much on the minds of anybody releasing records today.
Well, it's happening that way in downloading, yeah. But that music should be free feeling was a very important chapter in my life, because that's what caused the problem in 1971 in Newport when the kids broke the fence down. There were no rock festivals around the world. But what that did was bring me to New York, and that's where I changed the whole concept of the urban festival, of having the festival in many different locations. And that's happening all over the world again. So that was another thing we contributed, and people don't talk about that so much. But there were no urban festivals where you'd have 4 or 5 different. When we came to New York, I taught Carnegie Hall and Philharmonic Hall. That was before it was Avery Fish Hall. It is staying open an extra week while I did concerts at both places. And then I did things on the Hudson River, and I did things at Radio City Music Hall. I did dances in ballrooms at hotels. I did big one-night things at Yankee Stadium. I created this whole thing and that was all because I had learned about the multi-stage thing from working with the folk festival where Pete Seeger came up with different workshops of having, without any mics, the different 4 things happening at one time. So all of these things arrive out of something else. But that was a major thing in my life, coming to New York. And Carnegie Hall's going to honor me on my birthday. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit, because now New York, there were no jazz at Lincoln Center. There were no Lincoln Center festivals. There was no Summerfest. There was, none of these things. New York was a dead thing in the summer. And after we came, all of a sudden they started other people. New York is a city of entrepreneurs, let's face it. You get an idea, forget it, next year somebody's got the same idea and they're going to do the same thing. It started, in fact, there were only 1 or 2 jazz clubs in New York in 1972. You check that. And I just felt that if you had to go to an urban area, because of music should be free, and the kids in the suburban areas or in the country areas would break the fences down, you had to go where they couldn't break the fences down. and you had to go to an urban area. Why not go to New York instead of another city? And I was living in New York at the time, and I always liked New York for that respect. If you had an idea, there was no colonialism to the place. If your idea made sense, people gave you the opportunity to do it.
Yeah, I love hearing you come back to that as well, the image that if you have an idea, chances are somebody else is going to have that idea a year from now, and it gives you a sense that you have an obligation to the idea if you had it first to follow up on it before somebody else gets there.
Well, we followed up on it for years, but then we couldn't. The attractions, when we started doing those concerts, you're doing 40 concerts in a week, in 2 weeks. Well, actually it was like 20 concerts in 2 weeks, but the double concerts, we're doing double concerts. And then the next thing you know, people were playing these attractions, and agents were looking at who was selling out for you, and you sensed that there was a public for them. Other people grabbed on because they could do better to exploit them than you could, because that was their business, not your business. You can't, in a city like New York, you can't now you've got, for instance, the Blue Note Festival, which was strictly a takeoff on what we did on when I brought what you call the Care Fusion Festival. Mm-hmm. Remember I did that a few years ago, where they take everything that's happening, whether they're producing it or not, and they put it into a festival. But that's a very hard driving bunch of people. They own the Blue Note, they own the B.B. King's place, yes. They own, and that's big business. I never did that. I never wanted to do that. New York's a tough city to control. But we did control it for a good 10 years, maybe more, 20 years. We did the festival for 30 years or so. From, I think, 2002 might have been, or 2003, 2004, we started in 72. But by the end, we were just petering out. We couldn't maintain the real things that we did at the beginning. So let it go.
You also alluded to jazz at Lincoln Center. I think that has had a huge impact on the way jazz behaves in the city.
Well, I mean, it was Wynton Marsalis has done something that nobody else could do before. In fact, what I'm doing with the Newport Festivals Foundation, having a board of directors and some people giving us money, that all became of what Wynton established at Jazz at Lincoln Center, where the hierarchy of the cultural world that had money was contributing to jazz. Nobody contributed to jazz before that. Yes, the Laurellards were the first. They were pioneers when they financed Newport at the beginning. But that was only an isolated incident. Nowadays, there's a lot of status in contributing to jazz. And I'm finding that I'm benefiting from that, the foundation is benefiting from that. At the same time, what Wynton is doing is strictly an outgrowth of what we did with the New York Jazz Repertory Company, where we couldn't raise a dime. I think we literally raised $200. We had a party once to raise money. And that New York Jazz Repertory, Wynton will tell you that himself. He says, anything we're doing, you've already done. He said that to me many times. But it's a different period. we were not, when we did New York Jazz Repertory, it was too early. It wasn't ready for it. The city wasn't ready for it.
So what made jazz something that the cultured elite would want to contribute to?
Well, I think Wynton deserves the credit for it. When he started out, he was playing classical music, the Haydn trumpet concertos, and I think that focused attention to a young man that played jazz, and I know people talking about, I think that's very important, and then people got together, Wynton, Gordon Davis and other people to form the Jazz and Lincoln Center at Tully Hall, and then they just wanted to make it bigger. They could sense the money out there waiting to. Of course, the main reason is the 1%. The fact that so many people became, you look at the Forbes 400 10, 12, 15 years ago, there were no billionaires. It was all measured in $100 million. Now, there are hundreds of billionaires. So billionaires have to put their money somewhere. And a percentage of them get decided, ballet, Metropolitan Opera.
Jazz.
Right? So that's the main reason. The money's there, Wynton deserves a lot of credit for that. I mean, I told him that, I says, I could never have gone non-profit and raised the money I've raised if it hadn't been the Jazz at Lincoln Center for the money it's raised. We're only infinitesimal compared to them. But it's millions of dollars, not hundreds. They've raised hundreds of millions of dollars. I've raised millions of dollars,
And once more with feeling. If you like this interview and you'd like to let other people know about it, I encourage you to go to iTunes right now and subscribe to the Third Story podcast. If you're already a subscriber, may I suggest leaving a review? It's incredible how these reviews on the iTunes Music Store actually have an impact on other people finding the show and taking it seriously. Speaking of being taken seriously, I'm talking today with George Wein. This is a serious guy, somebody who influenced and affected the way music is presented all over the world. A lot of his contributions to festival management and festival presentation have really had a lasting impact on the music all over the world. In addition, he has managed to maintain a career as a piano player. Here we talk a little bit about how he managed that delicate balance of playing music in his own right and also supporting some of the great players of his day. Without any further interruption, here's the final segment of my conversation with George Wein. I hope you enjoy it, and I look forward to sharing more news from Newport coming up soon. You did find a way, and you have found a way to, play in the midst of all of this as well. What has that been like? Has that been the icing on the cake? Has it been something you think that helped the motor run? I mean, what is your life as a player like in the midst of all of your business?
I love the music and playing the music. Remember, I started with 13 years old leading a band, so I guess that was the direction I always wanted to play. I took the name of Grant Wilson, so I did not George Wein, Grant Wilson, and Stardust. So I guess I used to dream of playing in ballrooms and things like that, and when you're a kid, So, hey, the dream takes different directions as you get older. And then I found out that I could play well enough that when I had good musicians, I didn't hang them up, and then I could enjoy myself. And I found the next thing I knew that my name was big enough that people would come to me and say, George, why don't you put the band and we can do a tour? And George Wein and the Newport All-Stars. I says, great, so let's do it. But then a couple of times things happened that I had a lot of guts, like with Lester Young coming to this club, and I didn't want him to play in bebop. I wanted him to play swing like he did with Basie. So I put myself to play piano with Lester Young. I mean, you had a lot of chutzpah to do that, you know what I mean? And it worked. Mm-hmm. I mean, we had fun the whole week, and he had a good time. I played with Bechet, I set up, and it worked. So what the hell? I mean, I never felt I always called myself a piano player, never a pianist. Mm-hmm. But at least I knew what to play when I was playing and not to hang up and not to try to make myself a star, because I wasn't a star. I was just there to I knew how to lead a band. I knew how to make my musicians feel good on the stage, and I presented them. I'd like to see more people present musicians like I presented them, you know. I learned that from Duke Ellington, you know. Basie, I followed those people, you know, and I hang out with those people. I learned from them.
Do you think being a musician gave you an added sense of how to evaluate or appreciate new musicians and new artists when you saw them?
It was a help and a hindrance. I mean, I had to change my standards when I listened to a lot of young musicians, because they aren't interested in some of the things that I was interested in. They don't know any songs, you know. I mean, you know, to this day, I was talking to Ken Poplawski, and when they do these are not young kids, but on the ship, when they want to do jam sessions, a lot of the musicians, veterans, they don't know any songs. And we used to learn songs and could improvise on different songs, and how many. But now you got young people like a Bria Kongberg. I played a gig with her. I said, "What songs?" You know, she brought out a sheet of songs like this. I said, "Don't worry about it. We'll have no problem." and Nat Cohen, they just have a song once and they can play it, you know. But a lot of young players, they're not interested in that. And so I have to adjust my feelings to what they're doing. And so I listen for one thing, not whether it's something that is my music or what is the artistry behind what these young people are doing. And you can recognize artistry. When you hear Ambrose playing, he's an artist. And see, what I did when I was working one time at Dizzy's Club, I invited Rudresh, Miguel, and Ambrose to come each night and play with us. And they came to play, which that wouldn't have happened years ago. And we'd play one or two. I'd always take a number that I felt they could play modally on, like, what is this thing called, Love, or something like that. And I went to pay them. They wouldn't take any money from me. Can you imagine that? Young musicians, I wanted to give them like $150 to come and play in a couple of numbers. And they wouldn't take it. And I was very impressed by that, you know. And yet, those little sessions we did had a little influence on them. And now I use them on the festivals, and they play all over the world, and they're friends.
So the small gestures actually contribute to the way you think about them as artists and whether or not they're going to be good to work with. Well,
I mean, I don't want to influence their music because that's their life. I mean, I was just pleased when Rudresh did an article in an interview in Downbeat. I had told him, I said, Rudresh, blowing is not enough. You have to be creative. Get another horn. And he got another horn into the album. It's one of the albums of the year. But he wanted to play with a quartet. I said, no. He said, well, but I'm playing my own songs, but people don't know it. They think you're just blowing. If you get another horn and then you play your melodies, people know they're your melodies. Amir El-Safar, I go to hear him, and he's a wonderful trumpet player. But he was another trumpet player. Then he sang with a Middle Eastern feeling, and he's from Iraq, you know, his parents are from Iraq. So I said to him, I said, Amir, why don't you try to get the feeling in your playing that you do in your singing? Because I can't tell them how to play, but I mean, maybe make a suggestion. So he's told me he went right home and started to listen to his singing. He made an album with, and it became one of the albums of the year. You know, that makes me feel good. You know, that because I haven't told them that they had to do this, I had to do that. It's just listening to their own playing and making some suggestion or relationship to what they're doing. They either pick up on it or they don't, you know. But you can't say, oh, you got to play ragtime, you got to play swing, you got to play this, you got to play bebop, you got to play. You can't do that with a musician. You got to play more songs. You can't All you can do is make suggestion in relationship to what they're doing. And if they pick up on it, it helps them, good. If it doesn't, so you haven't hurt anybody, you know.
There's that moment in 1956 when Paul Gonsalves played that long, notorious solo. You feel that might be the moment also that changed other musicians' perception of how long they can play.
I dreamed that up. I don't know. I thought about that. I was writing the book. I said, maybe. Before that, people didn't play 27 choruses. After that, they all want to play as long as they could play. They couldn't take the horn out of their mouth, as John Coltrane, and Miles said to John Coltrane, why don't you try taking the horn out of your mouth, when John says, I never could stop playing when I stopped playing.
No, it's interesting, and I read that you said, you saw Stan Getz play at length at a jam session, but he never would have played more than a few choruses, and even in the club.
Oh, well, I caught him one night at an after-hour session when he was just playing, and he played for about 10 minutes, one solo, just kept playing, the ideas kept flowing out, That was a different kind of music, Stan Getz was a remarkable musician, but they were all remarkable. They all have their own style. And Stan was so influenced by Lester Young, but he had his own thing. But you'd go up to Stan's room in a hotel, and he'd have records on next to him. They were Lester Young records. It's another chapter in jazz, the concept of people. Hey, what does a musician have in life other than playing his horn? Basically, that's what he wants to do, is play. Lou Tobacco plays with the Newport All-Stars. He's happiest when he's playing with a bass and drum and nothing else, so he can play. That's when he's happy. With me, he has a good time and everything, but he's really happy when he's playing with his own, not even a piano player, he just wants a bass and drum so that he can play as long and whatever he wants. That's what they live for. That's their life. It's blowing their horn, man. And so when you say musicians are different from other, they are, because their whole life is wrapped up in that and their horn. And boy, I love them for that, because that's where things happen occasionally, A lot of times it can get boring. But when it happens, it is very exciting.
I hear you talk about young musicians. You speak about some of them almost like a father or a proud grandfather. I know that you didn't have children of your own, but you are kind of a grandfather or a father figure to so many musicians. Was that part of the thinking?
No, anything, but I'm trying to learn from them. I try to learn from the young people around me, because if I didn't learn from them, I might as well quit. I mean, I don't know anything about computers or downloads or things. I have to learn from them. I mean, a few years ago, I didn't know what an email was. Now I send out my own email, but I still don't. I'm learning every day from them. They know music. I got a kid working for me, Costa, who went to New School. He's a natural drummer. You're going to hear from him as the years go on. And they know so much music. I always saying, you got to listen to this group, you got to listen to this, you got to hear this, you got to hear that. Hey, that's why I want them around. And so it keeps me, if I'm 90 years old, it keeps me from trying to think I'm 90 years. I never think of myself as the granddaddy of anybody. I communicate with young like I communicate with you. I don't talk down to you. Mm-hmm. My big problem is sometimes older people try to tell you that you're wrong. I say, hey, if I'm wrong, let me be wrong.
Well, I would imagine that in most rooms that you walk into, you're the oldest guy in the room now.
Now, yes, there's a couple of friends I have that are a little older, but not too many, because so many die all the time. Every day I pick up the paper and see somebody I knew pass away, and so I look at the obituaries. It's sad that people pass away, but it's inevitable. We just wait for your turn, that's all.
And how do you hope to be remembered?
Well, I guess that's why I'm spending so much time trying to get an endowment to keep Newport alive. But personally, on a very intimate basis, at least I affected the lives of the people I knew a little bit. You know, when I go down to New Orleans and I see the building, the George and Joyce Wein Jazz and Heritage Center, that when I first went down there and I was married to Joyce, I couldn't bring her with me because it was against the law, you see. And I see the names out now that right on. That makes me feel good. Maybe we did have an impact. So maybe that's how we remembered. So we'll see.
George, thank you so much for taking time today.
Well, do me a favor, plug the festival a little bit.
Oh, you're down a couple hundred tickets, right? We're going to see if we can get that taken care of. Anything you're really looking forward to at the festival? Any acts or any events that
There's a lot of things I'm looking forward to. I mean, some of the people I never heard. I mean, you know, we had Gregory Porter emerge as the time went on. I don't know whether Jose James is in that league or not. I don't know. I'm interested to see. I like his records a little bit, but I want to see what kind of reaction he has with the crowd. But that's on one level, you know. When we've played. I'm talking about the more ones that have communicated. John Batiste. He's emerged as a star, and the first time I played him was 3 or 4 years ago, when all I had was 12, 15 minutes to give him and a solo piano. And he went on the stage at the casino, and the minute he put his hands on the piano, playing solo, he had the audience. And he played exactly what I asked him to play. What, in the 13 minutes, 14 minutes, right to the minute, and his show was complete. He knew. So the next year I brought his band, and the next year I put him on a big stage, and now he's going with, what's his name?
Colbert.
Yeah. And he's got a whole, I don't think we're responsible, because he was doing this everywhere. And, but we nurtured him, and it meant a lot to him, you know, and so.
I'm so inspired by John Batiste. He gives me such hope for the future of the music.
Yeah, so, but, you know, and then there's so many different things that I'm looking forward to. Herlin Riley has never been a band leader per se. He played with me on the Jazz Cruise a few years ago, and he's a very exciting musician. He's got a band. I want to see what happens with it, you know. But he's not a young contemporary player. He's going to swing. He's going to make something happen. I'm always interested what John Hollenbeck's doing. I love Maria Schneider. She's somebody I really love. And then I got Tom Harrell, who I haven't heard for years. I'm looking forward to it because he's so great. I just haven't heard him in a long time. And on and on and on and on and on. You know, there's so many groups. And I want to see how Cecile McLaurin is developing, because she's a star already, but I want to see what she's changed from. And then I'm always wondering what Cassandra's going to do. Whether you know, I hope she puts on a great show. She's a great singer, but you don't know. And Jamie Cullum's coming back. Jamie Cullum was big a few years ago. I don't know how he is now. He hasn't been in the American scene very long. But for a guy that could communicate and still have a love for jazz, he had reached that crossover point without going too far crossing over.
That's right.
So all of these things are part of the festival, you know.
I see when you talk about it, really curious about each one of these people's careers and thinking about where are they right now in their career and how does the festival impact that and how it might affect them in the future and you in the future.
Well, I am concerned with their careers, because if their careers don't develop, the festival isn't going to develop. We'll see. Thanks, you.
George.
Thank you. You got me talking pretty well.
Oh, good. Well, I'll take that as a compliment.
Well, I like that. I like it, because a lot of people don't get you know, you just... How did your festival start?